Are you ready?
Hello, and welcome to the Whole House Podcast, where you can find home, health, and family all in one place. Our team is comprised of moms from different upbringings and backgrounds, and we each have different passions and giftings and strengths. We each represent a different room, and we all make up the whole house. So grab a cup of coffee and join our overly caffeinated ladies here for the Whole House Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Whole House. Today is Kathleen
and Lori.
And Lori is going to tell her SPD story, which is sensory processing disorder, which her son has. And October is sensory processing disorder month. That's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. That's why we say SPD.
Yeah, SPD, which is not a branch of the military or the police. It is actually a disorder.
It's a disorder. It's one of those capital letter syndromes.
Yes, it is a capital letter syndrome. So Lori is going to tell her story of how she got the diagnosis and how she kind of figured out that something was not right. And it's amazing because mothers have this intuitive sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Something is not right.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that your child is damaged or wrong or there's something really bad. It just means that they, which we'll learn, process things in a different way.
Yes.
It's like if you go to China and you don't speak the language and you don't know the culture, you're going to feel out of sync. You're going to feel like you don't know what's going on. And
like
that's,
you don't belong.
Right. And that's often what these kids feel like.
Yeah.
So what was your earliest intuitive mom moment that something was not quite right?
Well, really, it was just a combination of a lot of moments of because I'd already had one child. And he was super easy. Mm-hmm. Like, scary easy. Like, I joke that he was easy on purpose because God knew what I was getting next.
Maybe you wouldn't have gotten another one if you would have known, right?
Exactly.
That kind of thing,
exactly. Yeah. As a baby, he screamed a lot more, like about everything. He did better in sleeping positions that you're not supposed to put babies because, of different risks. He did better in less clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born in October, believe it or not, funny enough. But, and he couldn't handle a lot of extra clothing. I mean, and if he liked to be swaddled as a baby, mm-hmm. very tightly, but in a light blanket. You couldn't put a heavy blanket on him.
Okay.
Like one of those little light receiving blanket type things. He liked to be swaddled. He would sleep forever if I was holding him.
But not if you weren't.
But if I wasn't, and he wasn't swaddled, he would scream.
Wow.
Yeah, he would just scream. When he became a toddler, he was just wild. Mm-hmm. He was just a wild boy. He was, I'm trying to think, oh my gosh, the stuff that he would get into. He, like maybe 3, climbed to the top of my fridge where we would keep the knives.
Oh my goodness.
And he shut a pocket knife on his finger and we had to get stitches at 3 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And we took him to get stitches and the doctor was like, we need to put him under because he's going to move around too much. Mm-hmm. And I knew that at that point he was already on his way to a meltdown, even though I didn't realize what was the diagnosis yet. I knew him enough to know that he was already done for the day, and to take him to a hospital to wait more hours to do this was just going to cause a lot of problems.
Right.
So I convinced the doctor, I'm like, if you just tell him what you're doing and let him know, this is what's going to happen. You're going to numb your finger and it's going to hurt. But after that, you won't feel anything and we're going to sew up your finger. And he held still and he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And yeah, it hurt. And he squeezed my hand and he cried a little bit. Mm-hmm. But because we explained it step by step, he was okay.
Wow.
And then he wanted to watch them sew his finger.
Oh.
At 3 years old. Yeah, I know, right? So that's like, you know, a little... I at first I thought, okay, maybe this kid is normal and my oldest is different. You know, because he was crazy. He had broken collarbone, and whenever big things like that happens, he never screamed. He would come to me calmly. Like whenever he broke his collarbone, he's like, "Mom, I fell and I heard a crack, and it makes a funny poppy noise when I lift my arm up and down like this." And I'm like, "Stop!
Makes me feel sick.
Stop doing that." But things like that, he wouldn't get overexcited about. Now, but a little paper cut, he would cry like crazy, and I'm like, "Why are you so backwards?"
Wow, and it's probably hard to diagnose because, especially with a boy, because with those things that you're describing, people are just going to say, well, he's just all boy. He's just all boy.
And that's what people would tell me, which is why I thought maybe my oldest, there was something not quite right about my oldest, because it was just such a difference. It was like a major marked difference between the two of them.
Wow.
Then, you know, and then I had my daughter when he was a toddler, and she was just as easy as her oldest. And I started being like, well,
one of these things
is not like the other. Exactly. But, you know, even though I suspect things, I would let people convince me otherwise. You know,
that's so hard as a mom, because there's so much pressure and so many people who have so much advice to give us, and unfortunately a lot of people are just talking out of the side of their mouth. In other words, they're just saying something to say something,
or repeat something that they've heard someone else say. Right.
And it doesn't actually help.
It doesn't.
And that's why you have to go with your mom gut. And I had that similar experience with one of my daughters who had some medical issues, and I was just getting a lot of advice out of people's, you know, just willingness to try to help in whatever way they could, but they really didn't know the whole scope of the situation.
Right, exactly.
And I just had to go with my gut, and I had to even convince my pediatrician, who finally said, well, you're the mom. You know what you're talking about.
Right.
I'm not with her every day. You know what you're talking about. So we ended up going to Pittsburgh to the Children's Hospital. But yeah, you got to push.
You do, whenever it becomes to your kids. And I really wish that I would have gotten this diagnosis way earlier so I could have understood him better. Not because I wanted him labeled. I just wanted to understand him.
Right, and that's a really good point, because we already recorded a podcast about this that will release after this one.
Yeah.
About diagnosing capital letter syndrome. So watch for that one, because here's the thing. It's worth saying more than once.
Yeah.
You're not getting a diagnosis for your child so that they can have a label to wear on a t-shirt.
Yes.
You're getting a diagnosis for your child so you can understand them and help them navigate the world through the way that they see things and feel things and hear things, which is different. So we need to know what's going on.
Right. And whenever I was suspecting different things, I got a lot of, they'll just slap a label on him. He'll be labeled the rest of his life, or they'll medicate him the rest of his life. They just want to medicate all the children. And, you know, like, that's the kind of response I was getting. And I'm like, but are you sure about that? You know?
Right.
And so, like, whenever he was in pre-K and kindergarten, things were okay, because pre-K and kindergarten is a lot of play. Mm-hmm. Which he craves, you know? Right. There's a lot of play. But I was warned by his kindergarten teacher at the end of the year that first grade might be difficult, and they might try to tell me he's ADD.
Oh, yeah. Which a lot of kids are, but sometimes that label gets thrown around too much.
I think it's the only thing that teachers know anymore right now. Like, they don't have a understanding of the full scope of those different disorders. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, the only one they really know right now is ADD. Mm-hmm. So that's what they just call it whenever someone is off.
Right. Or can't sit still.
Because they're not therapists. They're not occupational therapists.
Right.
They're not pediatricians. They don't. So obviously they've not studied those things. So
right.
They're
doing
really
what
know.
They've been trained to do. And I can understand, because I have a teaching degree, and we did have to take some special ed classes, but they were very, few and far between and limited, and you can't get the whole scope of what's going on in just one or two classes.
Yeah. So the kindergarten teacher was right. He got way worse in first grade because he was expected to sit down and be quiet and listen and pay attention to the board, not pay attention to the students around him. She moved him I don't know how many times that year. I'm like, It doesn't matter if you move him or not. So in first grade, actually it was kind of like the summer before first grade, is when I really started researching sensory processing disorder. And how that came about is because I had a friend whose son was exactly the same way. He was just a little bit younger. And she lived in an area that sensory processing disorder was more known than it was here. Mm. It was relatively new here whenever I was trying to get JR diagnosed. That not a lot of people had heard about. It was all ADD.
Wow. Yeah.
So she started sending me articles and checklists and all this information about sensory processing disorder. And the more that I read about it, so I researched it myself. Mm-hmm. I'm a researcher. If I think something's wrong, I'm gonna find all the information I can about it.
Yeah, me too. I'm a researcher too.
So before I jump in and be like, yes, this is it, Right. So the more I researched it, the more I realized this is my kid. This is exactly my kid. Mm-hmm. So I took I was ready to fight for my kid at my pediatrician. Luckily, I have a pediatrician that actually listens to me.
That's good.
I'm very lucky. He's always listened to me. I love our pediatrician. If we have a concern, he listens to it. Mm-hmm. So I took all this information to him, and I had this big, long thing prepared for him. I was ready.
Did you get to do your spiel?
No. He was like, okay, let's go to an occupational therapist. I'm going to refer you. And where he can get proper testing so that we know for sure. And that's what we did. Wow. I was like, oh, that was easy. But that's not always that easy.
Yeah, usually, just so you know, usually it's not that easy. Usually it is a fight and trying to figure out and go from doctor to psychologist and sometimes even to psychiatrist and trying to figure out what's going on with your child so that you can help them. So Lori's story is unique, and you know what? God knows what we need. And if you are struggling and you can't find someone who will diagnose your child, or if your pediatrician is not on board, find another one. Yeah. I know it's inconvenient. I know it's frustrating. My eldest daughter just went through this. She had to come. She actually drives like an hour to go to another pediatrician because the one that she was dealing with in her area was not helping. In fact, he kept forgetting that some of her kids already had a diagnosis, and he would make suggestions, and she would be like, that's been in their record for years.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah.
Find a good pediatrician.
Yes, it's very important. And I know, doctors know what they're talking about. I understand that. But a mother is not stupid. She sees this child every day. She knows this child on such a personal heart level that the doctors will never know that child. Right,
and the doctors are doing the best they can with the information that they have on hand. And often, you think you're seeing this child in your office for 15 minutes. You're not going to get the scope of what they're doing at home or at school. In fact, that child may be in, hypervigilant mode, and they might be quiet, and they might be well-behaved for those 10 or 15 minutes, and you just think, there's nothing wrong. This is just, so, yeah.
So, I would suggest, make a journal of behaviors. Start seeing patterns that happen. Start researching different things. Then go to your pediatrician. Do some of the legwork for him or her.
Exactly.
Because they only see them once a year if they're healthy, Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea. Keep a journal.
I got that from you. You journal everything.
I do.
But some of the things that my son would do, he only likes specific types of clothes. He's almost 14 now. He still only likes specific types of clothes.
Mm-hmm.
He will wear shorts all year long.
Mm-hmm.
And not just any kind of shorts. It has to be the silky basketball shorts.
It's funny because I use JR as an example when I'm talking about sensory processing disorder, because kids from hard places who have been adopted through foster care or just adopted period, they often have some sensory issues.
Yes.
And I always use JR as an example. I mean, I don't say his name, but now I just did.
It's all right. He won't care. He's very carefree. So
Yeah. He's just a good example, and that's one of the examples I use is, these kids it'll be 0 degrees outside and they're wearing shorts.
And then you get shamers.
Yeah.
Why didn't you put a coat on that boy?
Right. Or it can be 90 degrees outside and they decide, I'm going to wear these cowboy boots.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
jeans
Yeah.
because I want to.
Right, exactly. Or it's the only thing clean.
Like I think it's the Ramona series where she gets the big winter coat and it's like really hot outside and she decides that she's got to wear it to school.
Yeah. But he, and people joke that if they see JR in pants in the wintertime, then it must be really cold out. Because he always wears shorts.
Right. He does.
It just always. And a t-shirt. Sometimes I can get him to wear a sweatshirt. Not very often.
Not very often.
He only likes specific food textures, which that has changed. His doctor is really good at talking to him and telling him, hey, listen, sometimes that changes as you get older, so you should really try things that you didn't like before just to see. Yeah. So, and I've never made it like any food that, and I came from a family where you ate everything or you sat there.
Yeah.
Okay? And I hated it.
Yeah.
Because there are just some things I have never liked and I never will like. Green beans still make me gag.
I don't like eating vegetables that have fur on them either. So.
They still make me gag. I cannot eat a green bean to save my life, and my mom teases me about it. But
I get teased about it too because I can't. And then if I eat a peach, I have to peel it.
Yes, I can't say. I have to get nectarines. I can't do a peach. But
right.
But he has. So it's always been a rule in my house that if I make something that looks or smells funny and you haven't tasted it before, you have to at least taste it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to make you sit there and finish it. I'm not going to shove it down your throat.
Right.
And I think that came along whenever I had JR because and I didn't realize it, but he has texture issues, and if something is slimy, he can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
He hates rice because of the texture.
Right. Yep.
So if I have rice with dinner, he only eats the main entree.
Which is fine.
And he's tried it before. Like I've made stuffed pepper soup, and sometimes I catch him and he will try it. Mm-hmm. On a good day.
On a good day.
He's like, no, I still don't. Things, I still don't like rice, Mom. Okay, you still don't like rice, and then like it'll change. He'll overeat something so much that it'll change and he'll hate it.
Yeah, I was thinking, in fact, that's funny that you said that because I was thinking about that because when he's been over here and we have leftovers from an event or something.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I'm going to have one of those, we'll come inside from the pool and he'll have eaten all of them.
Yes.
So that's his tendency is instead of like, hey, I like this, I'm going to have one. I like this, so I'm going to have 20.
Yes, exactly. And like whenever his tendency is, his thought process is, I don't want someone else to eat all of these before I get them, so I'm going to eat them all. Mm-hmm. He doesn't understand why that's not right.
Yeah.
So if I buy something that he really likes, he ends up eating all of it before I go back to the grocery store, and he's like, there's nothing in the house to eat.
So I've heard that so many times from my son who's moved out now, but when he was at home, that was the whole thing.
Yeah. Yes.
There's nothing to eat because whatever was his favorite, he had eaten it all in one day.
Because he didn't want someone else to get to it first.
Even though nobody else really wanted
exactly.
Pebbles cereal.
Yes, exactly.
Especially not me.
Exactly. I'm trying to think. Like, socks and shoes were always a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I'm glad that some companies are coming out with tagless clothing and seamless socks. That's so helpful because it becomes a distraction.
Yes.
Like, they feel that and they can't focus on anything but that because of those sensory issues.
Yeah.
They can't. If the crease in the sock was wrong inside his shoe, he would melt down and scream until it was exactly right. Like, I can't tell you how many times I had to fix his socks and make sure they were right.
Well, this is a good point for you to explain, like, how do you know, like, if your child has this? If your child has sensory processing disorder or SPD.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know?
Well, and I think, and I'm going to read from the Out of Sync Child because this was like my sensory Bible.
Yes, it is. It's a very,
Whenever he was very
workshops
young.
and training,
It was the first book that his occupational therapist recommended for me whenever I first had the diagnosis, and everything was so overwhelming, and I just wanted to cry every single day because I just didn't know what to do. She was amazing. I loved his occupational therapist.
Well, and let me just insert here, Lori said that she was crying, she was overwhelmed. That is what you're going to feel when you get a diagnosis. It's normal.
Yeah.
You're going to feel really super overwhelmed and alone, which is not really true because there are people out there. There are people like us out there who have kids who have these capital letter syndromes and have survived and lived and made it. And we deal with things every single day, but you are not alone. So
well, this section in the Out of Sync Child, it's called "Don't We All Experience Some Sensory Problems?"
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. Here, and what it says is, from time to time, we all experience some problems processing sensations. Too much or too little sensory stimulation confuses the brain and can cause temporary discomfort. Illness, fatigue, and stress can also interfere with smooth functioning. For example, attending a noisy, crowded party can be overwhelming. Taking a bumpy airplane ride can overload your brain with rapid movement sensations. Car sickness.
Yeah, that's me.
Lingering in bed with the flu can prevent you from receiving sufficient movement experiences and make you feel weak. Walking from a well-lit room into a dark closet can deprive your eyes of light and therefore your brain of visual sensations. Not being in control of oneself is very unpleasant, but an occasional disorganizing experience is normal. It is when the brain is so disorganized that a person has difficulty functioning in daily life that the person is diagnosed as having sensory processing disorder.
So read that last sentence again, because that is the key
That
right
is
there.
the key. It is when the brain is so disorganized that a person has difficulty functioning in daily life that the person is diagnosed with having sensory processing disorder.
Right, so it's not just once in a while. For example, like if I'm sitting in the back seat of a car on a really windy road, I'm going to get car sick.
Yeah.
But that's just every once in a while. Because, by the way, I'm not riding in the back seat of a car.
Nope.
all the time. Actually, I try to avoid that as much as possible because I know that about myself. Mm-hmm. So those are just things that occur once in a while.
Yes.
But if the child is affected in his daily life, like he can't navigate daily life, like wearing socks and shoes and food issues and movement issues, then you might want to seek a diagnosis.
Yes. And but I mentioned he's almost 14. He still has these problems. It's not something he's ever going to grow out of.
Right, and that's kind of that old-fashioned thinking, and we still hear it a lot, like, oh, they'll just grow out of it.
I think that the reason people think that is because as people become adults, they learn how to cope with it.
Exactly.
It's not that they didn't grow out; they grew out of it. They've just learned how to cope with those things.
Mm-hmm. Right, and they learn how to better navigate and manage their life, because obviously a 30-year-old with SPD, when he goes out to eat and he knows that he doesn't like rice because of the texture,
He's
not going to order rice.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is different than a 4-year-old, and you're still trying to discover what they will eat and what they won't eat.
Right.
So
It's
that's
different.
completely different.
And you think that they're just being defiant.
Right. You will eat this no matter
Yes,
what.
exactly.
This is what we're having for dinner.
So, school became a problem with him. He only went to public school until 2nd grade, and his 2nd grade teacher was amazing. Okay, I loved her so much, but I couldn't take her and put her with him every single year until he graduated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would be so overwhelmed at school trying to be, quote, good. So that, I really hate behavior charts, and yes, I think it's important for children to manage their behavior and learn how to do that, but I don't think those behavior charts, I'm not a fan of public humiliation, and I feel like sometimes those behavior charts can become that.
Right.
For some kids, not all of them.
Right,
obviously.
because, we have to remember with kids with capital letter syndromes, it's cannot, not won't.
Yeah.
Right. They cannot regulate. They don't have the ability, and that's what we mean. They don't have the ability to regulate. So basing everything on their behavior is just setting them up for failure.
Exactly. And then they start comparing themselves with their peers, and they're like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I do these things as easily as my friend over there can?
Right.
And it makes me sad.
Yeah.
He would come home on the bus and just melt down. Like the rest of the evening was World War III in our home. And like his siblings would get the brunt of it. I would get the brunt of it. It would just be horror at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Until bedtime. It was ridiculous. And he fell really behind in reading and writing, partly because his sensory processing disorder. Like if he saw a bunch of words on a page, all his brain saw was a whole lot of words, and he couldn't focus on any single word.
Okay, so it was just too overwhelming.
It was overwhelming for his visual input. Couple that with the fact that he's dyslexic, and you've just got a kid that's going to struggle with those kinds of things. It makes it really difficult. When he was falling behind, and a lot of things came together for me to finally say, I'm just going to homeschool my kids. And that was one of them. So I pulled them all out, and we had to start from scratch with reading and spelling and writing. And he's still behind, but he's going.
Right, and that's the important thing, is that he's going. Like you were saying about behavior, it's also very important that you don't compare your children academically.
Yeah.
Because if they're making progress, then that's something to celebrate.
Still progress.
It's still progress, and it's not based on what every other child at their age knows, because the truth is, if you think about it long term, let's say you're listening to this in your 30s. How many people walk up to you on a daily basis and say, when did you learn how to read? I mean, really, when did you learn how to read?
Nobody.
People don't ask you that question. So what our aim is for our children is that they academically make progress at their level, at their speed, at what they can handle, because we want them to experience success.
Right.
Because nobody wants to move forward unless they feel like they're experiencing success. I mean, period, on the planet.
Right.
Who wants to move forward if you feel criticized and shamed and like you can't keep up? Like, keep up with whom? Who are you keeping up with?
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to remember that especially when you have a child who has a capital letter syndrome, you want them to feel successful. Yeah. And if they're in a situation like JR was, where he's comparing himself with his classmates and saying, I can't keep up. I can't keep up.
I'm not good enough. I heard I'm not good enough so much.
Right, or I'm stupid. I'm stupid. I heard that one like 40 bazillion times. It's like, well, maybe that environment is not the best for them.
Yeah. And he's still, that S word, stupid, is a hard, it's still a trigger for him, even now, and he hasn't been in public school since 2nd grade.
Wow.
Like, if someone insinuates that he's stupid, or calls him stupid, or saying that something that he did was really stupid, he takes it as you are saying that he is stupid, and he will either lash out in a fit of rage, or break down and melt down and start crying. Like that's like the 2 extremes he's got. Because it's very sensitive area for him.
Right.
Because he felt that way for so long. Because people just don't understand.
Yeah.
They don't understand him.
Yeah, I know. And that's very common with any kid with a capital letter syndrome or a kid from hard places, because whether we like it or not, most of the environments that we live in are all based on behavior.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for these kids. You go to church and it's, can you sit still? Can you participate? Can you, or, you go to school and it's the same thing. It's all of these things are all based on behavior.
Yeah.
And these kids who can't, then they're the ones that feel as if they know, they look around and say,
yeah, they know they're different. They know.
Yep.
They're not stupid.
Right. They're not stupid.
They know. And so, they think that something's wrong with them. And nothing's wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them.
Right. They have a different way that they process things.
Yes, exactly. Like, that's what, he did something yesterday, and I can't even remember what it was. But he gets so hyper-focused on something minuscule that he can't move forward until that thing is resolved. And he's a teenager, it's still that way. His brain right now, he knows what he wants to do when he becomes an adult, and he knows the path to get there. So if we aren't learning something that has to do with that's going to help him in that path, he doesn't want to know about it. Because it's not going to help him in the future. Like, that's how his brain is focusing right now. Now I tell him, listen, legally, I have to teach you these things. You have to know these things. Well, that's stupid.
I know.
He's like, it's not going to help me in the profession I want to go into. I'm like, you don't know that. It might. Okay? But in his brain, if it doesn't help better him on the path that he is on, he doesn't care. And that's where I'm at right now, because he's a teenager.
I had a lot of those days with my kids in high school too, who had capital letter syndromes. It was just like, why do I need to know that for this? I'm not going to even do that. I'm not even going to use that. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, because legally, if I don't teach you, I'll get in trouble. There you go. That's what I do,
That's what I said. And
legally, I have to have you in school this many days. Legally, I have to teach you these subjects. Legally.
Right. So you have to put it in a set of parameters for them.
Yes.
So what were you gonna read us?
Well, I asked Kathleen before we started, can I just read this entire book out loud? Because I love this book so much. The Out of Sync Child. It's just so amazing. And we've mentioned it more than one time.
Yes, and we'll probably mention it again.
Yes. But there was like in the first chapter, does your child have sensory processing disorder? It goes through so much information to help you figure this out. And really that first chapter is like a lot.
Yeah.
And then the rest is like, I don't feel so bad anymore, Right. But they have a lot of visuals, and one that I like is the category and subtypes of sensory processing disorder, because this can be so broad. Just like anything else. It's not just one specific type of kid doing a specific type of thing. So like on the top you have sensory processing disorder. And then branching off from that, you have sensory modulation disorder, sensory discrimination disorder, sensory-based motor disorder. And then off of those, you have more like sensory over-responsivity, sensory under-responsivity, sensory craving, and you can have multiples of those at the same time. Postural disorder, dyspraxia. You can have, like, for some things, he craves stimulation. For other things, he is under-responsive. I remember a story when he was in public school still. He was at the water fountain getting a drink, and someone brushed by him very lightly. He, because he didn't see them, thought that they were shoving him, and he turned around ready to fight.
Yep. Which is pretty common.
Yeah. So if you suspect your kid has sensory processing disorder, I can't recommend this book enough. It goes through, like, I'm looking at their checklist here. It has the different sensations, like touch, movement and balance, body position, and muscle control. And then it has checklists of all the things that maybe you would notice with your child if you suspect something like this that you can check off. It has sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch that you would check off for different things to help you kind of single out where your child is at.
Right. So, like Lori said, you need to go to whatever professional you're going to. You need to go and you need to be armed. And this is one of the ways to get armed, is to go through this book. And I have that marked. Don't unmark my page.
I marked that.
Okay. I have all kinds of little marks in this book.
I marked that one.
I actually wrote names in this book. When I read this book for the first time, I'd be like, this kid? Yeah, that kid? That kid? Yeah. Because, like we were saying, you can have different sensory issues, even if you don't have sensory processing disorder. So even if your child falls in another capital letter syndrome and they have sensory issues, this is still a great book to read.
Right.
Because what I found is kids from hard places, they always have sensory issues.
Oh, yeah.
They always do. So this is a really good reference book. And then you can also read the Out of Sync Child Has Fun, which is full of activities to do with kids to help them with their sensory processing.
Yeah. I want to just read this possible causes for SPD, because you when your child is not quote unquote normal, you wonder what you did wrong.
Okay. Well, this is a good
So it says the problems discussed above, which is the different allergies and different things that can do that, may coexist with SPD but do not cause it. So, like, allergies could coexist, selective mutism, genetic syndrome, psychological problems, Asperger's, nonverbal learning disorder, dyslexia, autism, learning disability, and ADHD can all coincide with sensory processing disorder, but do not cause it, is what they're saying right now. Okay, because sensory processing disorder can be its own disorder on its own as well, and I think that that's where a lot of people got mixed up, like they didn't realize that. So number one, a genetic or hereditary predisposition, often the case if the child's parent, sibling, or other close relative has some SPD. And in our case, I'm pretty sure that is it. That it's hereditary, that it's a genetic thing.
Okay.
My husband is so much like my son that it's scary sometimes. Like, I wonder how I actually contributed to the making of this child. Because they're just so much alike. So I think that one is like a big flag in our situation,
Okay.
And he just didn't realize that's what his problem was when he was younger, because he had a lot of the same problems that JR did.
Right, and often during that time period when he was growing up, that wasn't diagnosed.
It wasn't a thing.
It wasn't even.
They didn't have.
He's just a boy.
Yeah,
and
he didn't even have ADD. I don't think that was even a thing when we were kids.
Wow.
In all honesty, or maybe just starting. But prenatal circumstances, like chemical medications or toxins like lead poisoning that the fetus absorbs, the mother smoking or drug or alcohol abuse, which you get from adopted and foster kids. Unpreventable pregnancy complications like virus or chronic illness, emotional stress, or a problem with this placenta. I don't think that people realize that your emotional state during your pregnancy affects the baby inside of you.
I know. That one is very, very ignored, and it needs to be acknowledged. And
Yes.
that's why it's so important when you know you're pregnant is to make sure that your emotional state is regulated. And that also means that if you're struggling with a circumstance or an issue, you need to get help. Don't just say, oh, this isn't going to affect anything. It will.
It will. And then the last thing they have in that category is multiple births, like twins or triplets. My niece and nephew are twins. They were born early. They were rushed right into the NICU because of how early they were, and that my niece had she has Down syndrome, and she had a hole in her heart that she had to have surgery for actually like a year ago. But that I could recognize the sensory issues in them very early.
Right.
Like before the birth to 3 came in and said, hey.
Right.
You know?
Because you're familiar with this.
Just because I'm familiar with it, exactly.
Right.
So, number 3, prematurity, low birth weight, which happens in twins and triplets and that kind of thing a lot. Number 4, birth trauma due to emergency C-section, lack of oxygen, or surgery soon after birth. Again,
Yeah,
like,
a lot of people ignore that one.
they do
too.
ignore that one.
Because we've got all this wonderful modern medicine where they can.
But that's traumatic to a child.
Exactly.
Postnatal circumstances like environmental pollutants, excessive stimulation, like child abuse or warfare, which we know about.
Yes.
Insufficient stimulation and limited opportunities to move, play, and interact with others, which you said you found in like orphanages.
Yes, definitely.
Lengthy hospitalization, institutionalization in an orphanage, such as in Romania or another Eastern European country.
Yes.
And then number 6 is just unknown reasons.
Right. And here's the thing. If you are thinking maybe your child has this and you need to get a diagnosis, don't read these or listen to these and just think it's all my fault. You don't have time for that.
No.
Here's the thing. Things happen. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. They just happen.
And, you know, it's really interesting because some people think that if you adopt, that you don't have that mom guilt because you're just like, oh, that happened before. No, it's not true. Every single person who has a child in their home has mom guilt no matter what. So, but you just have to set that aside and deal with the issue at hand because you don't have time and you don't need to waste your energy.
Yes, exactly. Time and energy.
For those things because that time and energy needs to be used for helping your child.
Yes, you can't fix what has already happened. You can't go back and change it. So you might as well address it and deal with it now and help that child.
Right, exactly. So I think we're gonna wrap this one up unless you had any.
I just want to
final
say
thoughts.
that while it does, they start to regulate on their own and they start getting better at that. It never goes away completely. Like
there is, like Rachel said at the gathering in our little workshop on capital letter syndromes, thriving with capital letter syndromes, is there's no finish line.
No, there's not.
Don't be looking for the finish line. And I know it's harder for guys because they're always like, all right, let's just fix this.
Let's just do all the steps to make it better and make it go away. Yeah, that's just a guy. They're the fixers. They like to fix things. This isn't something that can be fixed. It's something that can
be navigated
and learn to cope with and use tools to help in life, but it's not a fixable thing. It's not a thing that they're going to grow out of. And like sometimes they'll revert back. Like that's what I wanted to say. We're in teen years right now. Hormones are surging. There's some things that they're reverting back to. because there's a lot going on right now.
Right, there's regression. Yep.
So, we gotta redo some of the tools that we learned when they were toddlers.
Place to start.
Yes.
You have to go back, and that's like one of the superpowers that Amory and I talked about on the Superpowers of Motherhood, Adoption, and Foster Care edition, which really applies to kids with capital letter syndromes too. Is like one of your superpowers is going back to the beginning and doing everything all over again.
Yep.
Some people don't have that superpower because they don't want to have to do that, but
hard.
you have to.
Yes, and that's why I think that the ETC parent training is so good.
Yes.
Kathleen, you are a parent trainer. It's a 9-week course. Yes, 9-week course. And while they do kind of highlight a lot of adoption and foster care, it is so helpful for anyone that works with children because of all the different capital letter syndromes. You work in church, you're going to deal with some of these kids. You work at a school, you're going to deal with some of these kids. You work in an outreach, you're going to deal with some of these kids. Just because you don't have children doesn't mean you're going to deal with some of these kids. Walmart's a big one. They need to train their employees to not. But yes, so I think that is such a huge helpful training. And it's a lot of work.
It is. It's like a college course. It is. But it's investment for your children.
Yes.
What are you willing to invest for them? We talk about money investments. We talk about setting aside for college if we can do that. We talk about all these monetary investments we do. We buy a house, we buy car seats in cars. But this is a time investment. And it's so worth it because it will help you understand where your child is coming from, and you'll learn different parenting tools because traditional parenting doesn't work with these kids. It doesn't work. And I can tell you that Lori's told me a bazillion times, and I've heard it myself about my own children, is you just need to discipline them more. You need to be stricter. You need to be this, and you need to be that. And that just doesn't work with these kids at all.
It just doesn't, no.
So, thanks for joining us today, and if there's any topic further into this that you would like us to focus on, just let us know.
I'll read the book to you out loud.
We'll read the whole book to you. So thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.
We're so glad you could join us here for the Whole House podcast. Please subscribe, and if you give us a review, we might pick our favorite and send you a prize. Please remember to like the Whole House Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at @the_whole_house. And please sign up with your email on our website, thewholehouse.org, to be notified when new things are happening here at the Whole House. Thanks so much for listening.